Hey gang, welcome to another week. So last week you read the book of Lamentations, and first of all, sorry about that. It's kind of a tough one to read. We typically, if we were together in class, we would sit on the floor. In fact, at this point in the school year, we get rid of tables and chairs altogether, and every day from here on out, we would sit together on the floor. And the reason for that is it's a posture of mourning historically. A lot of cultures, you'd sit on the floor in times of grief. And for our story of Bible 2, this is definitely that time. I mean, they have lost everything that matters to them, including loved ones. Certainly, just every family would know someone who died or who's been killed by the Babylonian siege and all that followed. But also, the city that they love, Jerusalem, has been destroyed. The temple where God lives has also been destroyed. Like, this is some dark times. Typically, I would show this video. For some reason, it's not working. It's a video of Mr. Baker, and he walks us through, when an economy is going through what Jerusalem was going through. What do you do? And the answer is, if you don't have hope for the return of this economy, you get out, you sell. And I always appreciate that video from Mr. Baker because it sets up an important part of this dark time. And it's this: God, though many of you in your Psalm 137 journals wrote about, is God absent? Has he left? Has he forgotten about us? The beautiful glimmer of hope in this dark time in our Bible's history is that God is actually faithful, and he shows that in two really cool ways that I wanted to talk about really briefly. We'll call it two glimmers of hope from prophets of the exile. The first is this guy Jeremiah, and we're not going to go into all of Jeremiah. I mean, you could have a whole class on Jeremiah, but one really important piece that I love talking about in the middle of this exile and destruction type stuff, and that's and also Ezekiel. The cool thing with Jeremiah is when everything's tanking, people are starving. You read in Lamentations, people are calling out. People are thinking of eating their children. I mean, just some really, really dark and messed up stuff. In the middle of all that, God tells Jeremiah in chapter 32, he says, buy a field. And guys, if you're reading the Bible and without the context, without understanding, this just seems totally random. In all this chaos, God just says, oh, by the way, buy a field. Well, what's going on? What's going on is that God's saying, invest in this city. Everyone else is getting out. Everyone else is selling. Just think of it like this. If you owned property, let's say, actually right now on Lake Michigan, right, with the water rising, people's homes, a lot of homes are in jeopardy. You wouldn't buy property on a spot where you wouldn't think it's even going to be there in a few weeks, right? I mean, it's just foolish. So a lot of people in Jerusalem, they're realizing, that this city's doomed. So they're selling, they're getting out. But God says, I'm buying, I'm investing. And the whole idea, if Mr. Baker's video had worked, he would have said, you only invest in a market or in an economy if you have hope for the future. And that's the very thing that God does. And he has hope for the future of Jerusalem, which is this beautiful picture in buying a field. You maybe have heard that really famous Jeremiah 29:11 verse, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Really famous Bible verse, right? But a lot of people don't realize that it's coming out of this particular time in Israel's history, really dark and terrible time for the people. And yet, in the midst of this chaos, God reaffirms his commitment to them and says, guys, there's a future, not just for you, but for this relationship he has with them. Okay, yeah, it's often used like this, but the second really cool glimmer of hope is in the book of Ezekiel. Oh, I just love this one. Ezekiel is one of the prophets of exile. His book opens up when they're actually captives in Babylon. And here he is, a captive in Babylon, and he's walking by this river, and all of a sudden he has this weird vision. And reading this again without context, it's like, well, that was really weird. I don't get the value in that at all. But if you understand the context, it's really powerful and beautiful, something that I've come to treasure. He looks and he sees God's throne, and God's throne has wheels. And it's like this really random, oh, God's throne has wheels? Cool. No, it's all of a sudden you realize God is mobile. What does that mean? God is coming towards us. See, this is really hard for us to wrap our minds around, but they believed in the ancient world deities were in particular regions. It's called a localized deity. The god lives in a particular region. So when they travel to another place, they say, so like, who are the gods around here? Well, we see little glimmers of that idea in the Bible where they're thinking God is back in Jerusalem. That's where he dwells, in that broken down house now. But Ezekiel says, no, I see God's throne and he's coming toward us. God is not committed to a particular geography. He's committed to a particular people, and where they are, he's going to be. There's just no buts about it. He's going with his people into exile. And that, I mean, if that doesn't speak powerfully to you, man, God is committed. And I just can't help but think, get ahead of our story into Jesus. Here we have this God who's committed to his people, even to the point of putting on flesh, even to the point of death, going to death to be with his people, and of course to bring them back out of death. That's what we celebrated just a couple weeks ago with Easter. So God leaves his throne and goes into captivity with his people. Oh, there's a powerful story about this gentleman during World War II who, long story short, I'd encourage you, we'd read it if we were together. I always butcher his name, Korizak. He actually went with the children. He started a school, and during World War II, and the Nazis basically took these children, his children, at this school slash orphanage. They took them to concentration camp, and he was not required to go, but he said, look, if my children are going there, I'm going there too. He went with them, and eventually they were killed in gas chambers, and he went with them, and the story goes that he sang with them as they all died, and he did that voluntarily because he was so committed to these children. That just reminds me of this vision in Ezekiel chapter 1. That's who this God is. Last vision of hope. So we had Jeremiah, and now we have this Ezekiel guy. The last one in Ezekiel, an additional favorite is in chapter 37, 1 through 14. Strongly recommend you go read that right now and pause the video. But Ezekiel's given a vision of these dry bones, and in this vision, he's walking with God, and God says, Son of man, talking to Ezekiel, can these dry bones live? And the valley of dry bones is a symbol of just the desolation of the people of Jerusalem. They have no hope. I mean, this is just absolute lifeless in captivity. And Ezekiel, instead of giving the correct answer, no, these dry bones can't live, he's walking with the living God and says, so only you know, God. And God, I imagine God thinking, good answer, Ezekiel. And he says, Ezekiel, I want you to prophesy to these dry bones. Talk to them. Tell them that they're going to come back to life. And Ezekiel does. And as he does, God breathes. And by the end of the vision, there's this whole valley, not with dry bones, but with living, breathing people. God has brought life out of death. And he's going to do it again with the exile and the destruction of his people. So don't give up hope. Don't quit on the story, because there's so much more just around the corner. And again, man, if that isn't the story God is telling, we see that in the life of Jesus so powerfully, life out of death. Okay, I'm getting too worked up and I'm gonna stop. Calm down here now. Hey, there's not enough time on this video to watch it together, so go to YouTube, please, and I'd love you to listen to Gunger. Dry Bones is the name of the song. It's about that vision that we just talked about, and this connects with the assignment below. So I think you're gonna like it. It's a bit haunting of a song. I mean, it's just really, I don't know how to describe it. I think you'll get what I mean when you hear it, but also really, really cool.